The talks going to be held here are Fine-Tuning and Intelligent Design, Some New Results on Solar System by Palash Devangan. The second talk will be Indo-Aryan Invasion Theory, Myth or Fact by Mr. Ganesh Subramaniam. The third talk is Unpredictable Fundamental Particles and a Systematic Gathering in Creating Predictable Matter by Dr. Tulsi Raman, KH. And the fourth talk is Vimansastra from a Modern Aircraft Dynamics Perspective by Mr. Baburanjan Thakur. The talks going to be held in Gargi Auditorium is Roots of Homeopathy in Vedas by Dr. M. Narsimha Rao. The second talk is Ramanujan, Religious Man and Mathematician by P. Kaushik. The third talk is Dogmatic Science and Pragmatic Spirituality by Gautam Paul. The fourth talk is Max Planck on Science and God by Mr. Siddharth Tiwari. And the talks going to be held in Maitri Hall are Can Machines Think Mathematically? Perspectives of Gödel's Theorem by Mr. Jayanarayan Turu. The second talk is Symbiosis of Spirituality and Science, The Ultimate Reality by Shubhra De. Arnab Sanyal. Subhra De is the person here. Arnab Sanyal. No. So I hope you all had a very delicious lunch. We can continue with the next session. I would request Dr. K.P. Tripathi from Mahatma Gandhi Kashi Vidyapit, Varanasi, to be the chair session for this. The topic of the session is Young Mind Speaks.
Invite the first speaker, Mr. Palash Devangan. Hello, yeah. Mr. Palash Devangan from Dehradun. Second speaker, Mr. Ganesh Subramanian from IIT Kharagpur. Third, Dr. Tulsi Raman from Bangalore, IISc. Fourth, Mr. Baburanjan Thakur from IIT Kharagpur. speaker, Mr. Palash Devangan, to speak on fine tuning and intelligent design and new results on solar system.
Hello, 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 hello.
Oh, so I repeat it again. Time for the talk for 15 minutes, followed by 5 minutes for the discussion.
Okay, thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to all. So here I am going to present a presentation on the topic God, Intelligent Design, and the fine tuning. So in this conference so far, we have already been familiar with I think this topic. Some of you must have been familiar, the intelligent design and fine tuning. But let me again introduce or reintroduce you to these terms. So one of the biggest mystery of our civilization or the is that the whether how this universe came into existence and how the living beings or the humans came into existence, and somehow that points to the existence of God. Okay, so in due course of time, the scientists have come to some idea how we can explain the origin of life and universe by means of existence of God. So there are basically two scientific or principles, or you can say the arguments, because nothing have been completely been proven so far, but as far as the research has been done, so on the basis of that we can call it as an argument. So there are two types of argument. First of all is the intelligent design, and another is the fine tuning, right? So one of the argument is that intelligent design. So they claim, this proponents of this so-called intelligent design claim to confidently rule out natural processes as the sole origin for certain biological systems, as proposed by the Darwinian theory, and this has been resourced from the book, the paper from the Behe and Dembski. And second variation of the argument is from the design, that is argument from fine tuning. Okay, fine tuning more or less is part of the intelligent design, in which the evidence for purposeful creation is seen in the laws and constants of the physics. So let's say what's intelligent design. So intelligent design, on short ID, refers to a scientific research program as well as a community of scientists, philosophers and other scholars who seek evidence of design in nature. So there are a lot of things which have not been understood so far, like the very symmetry in the nature and different complex designs as we'll go to see that. And so this theory holds that the intelligent design holds that certain features of the universe and the living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not on an unidirected processes such as natural selections. So some of the scientists claim that whether that could be intelligent, I mean this could be a scientific theory or not. So if you go to the scientific theory, these have basically 4 steps of explaining the scientific theory. Is that first of all is the observation, hypothesis, experiments and conclusions. So first of all we have an hypothesis, then an observation. Based on the observations we make some hypothesis, and then we do some experiments and we come to the final conclusion, and after confirming that final results from the experiments, we come to the final theory of the came from the hypothesis, right? So in that, idea begins with the observation that intelligent agents produce complex and specified information, short CSI. Design theorists hypothesize that if a natural object was designed, it will contain high levels of CSI. For example, you can see a photo of a cell, basically depicting the anatomy of a cell, where you can find the thing is called as an irreducible complexity, which is the most prominent feature of an intelligent design, because one easily testable form of CSI is irreducible complexity, which can be discovered by experimentally reverse engineering biological structures to see if they require all their parts to function. Okay, if we you go and analyze these kinds of very complicated structures, you will find that if any of the tiny fraction or any of the part of this anatomy is taken out from the cell, then this cell would be not come into function. Similar to that, Michael Behe gave an example of this bacterial flagellum, where you can see that this flagellum has a kind of a structure of a motor, right? It is, if you ask somebody or some scientist, he will say that how this design come from, or is it the design some research institution has put into this bacteria or what. But it is nothing like that. It has come by in its own. As you can see, there is the base part, or in the middle one there is a rotor, and the stators are surrounding to the rotors. Is kind of a motor which functions as also as motors. So, but this seems to be like someone has designed that, right? And in this also, if you take out some of the parts of this thing, then you cannot, then this will not be able to function properly. So we can think that, or we can go to certain hypothesis that there must be some designer behind that. So that was some description of the intelligent design. Now we come to the fine tuning. So fine tuning, as we understood as the theoretical physics, gives the definition as circumstances when the parameters of a model must be adjusted very precisely in order to agree with the observations. So from the observations or experiments, we have got a lot of physical constants, value of the physical constants or physical quantities, like the value of mass of electrons and charge of electrons and so on. So, but and some of the things have already also been confirmed by the observation and experiments, and which forms the universe, which says that universe is also fine tuned. And how which can be explained as the fine tuned universe is that fine tuned universe is the propositions that a condition that allow the life in the universe can only occur when certain universal fundamental physical constants lie within a very narrow range, so that if any of several fundamental constants were only slightly different, the universe would be unlikely to be conducive to the establishment and development of matter, astronomical structure, elemental diversity, or life as it is understood. Paul Davies, a very prominent physicist, you can say he's got a lot of expertise. He says that there is now a broad agreement among physicists and cosmologists that the universe is in several respects fine-tuned for life. However, the conclusion is not so much that the universe is fine-tuned for life, rather it is fine-tuned for the building blocks and environments that life requires. So, let us see some of the examples of the fine-tuning. So far we have been explained what is a fine-tuning, but see if we miss the fine-tune, what happens? So, from the calculations it indicates that if the strong nuclear force had been stronger or weaker by as little as 5%, the life would be impossible. Some experiment conducted by Leslie in 1989. Calculations by Brandon Carter shows that if gravity had been stronger or weaker by 1 part in 10 to the 14th power, then the life-sustaining stars like Sun could not exist, right? And this would most likely make the life impossible. If the neutrons were not about 1.001 times precisely the mass of the proton, all protons would have decayed into the neutrons, or all the neutrons would have decayed into the protons, and thus life would not be possible. If the electromagnetic force were slightly stronger or weaker, life would be impossible for a variety of different reasons. Now, let's come to our solar system. It's a part of our universe. So, basically, we'll focus on that. So, let's see what unique, tremendous features the Sun has. So, as you know that there may be there are different types of galaxies and have different shapes like spiral, elliptical, and irregular galaxies, in which our galaxy has a form of elliptical. It's a spiral galaxy. So, in this galaxy, at the center of this galaxy, there is a large or huge electromagnetic radiations to which if any planet comes, it will, you can say, completely, it will, because of this electromagnetic radiations, it will make the planets to make the impossible for life to sustain or to evolve. So, as you see, there are in the galaxy 76% of the stars are red dwarfs and they do not emit as much as energy as our Sun, because our Sun is efficient, you can say, precisely far distance from the center of the galaxy, so that it can produce life. So, these dwarfs, they emit radiation in the red spectrum, which is less efficient. Okay, there may be there are the stars which can emit spectrum as a red spectrum or blue spectrums, and both are not capable of sustaining or producing life in any kind of a planet, but the Sun has a kind of a spectrum middle of this blue and red spectrum, so that it precise to some you can say combination of these two colors or different spectrums, so that it can sustain life. Right. So, by comparison, not only is our Sun is the right size, but it produces the right mix of red and blue light. Now comes to the features of the Moon. So, the Moon's gravitational pull on the Earth stabilizes the tilt in the Earth's axis of rotation, and if see if this does not happen, or if the axis vary, okay, then the result would be that over the time the North Pole would migrate down toward the equator, and there would be tremendous changes in the climate around the Earth. So, the areas that were once fertile would become either too hot or too cold for crops to grow. As a result, life would be confined to a small compact niche, and a large diversity of life probably would not exist. The Mother Earth. So, if the Earth's mass were much smaller, its gravity would not be strong enough to retain its atmosphere. So you can see how much precise our value of Earth's gravity is. So if the Earth's mass were, again, if it's too large, then the pull of its gravity would be too large, and it would not be possible to have high mountains. Since you can see most of the part of the Earth is covered with the water, and to allow the water to our at the living part of the world or Earth, the mountains are needed to have a kind to keep a kind of a block to water, allowing to the living areas. Then the iron in the Earth's core remain molten due to radioactive reactions take place that generate heat in the interior and generates a magnetic field around the Earth. So if it is not there, then there will be the radiations which comes from the sun, ultraviolet radiations that will enter to the atmosphere of the Earth, and the life cannot be possible then. So Earth's size and the structures are also very precise as its orbit move. If it would be more elliptical than it's now, then the Earth would either be too hot when it approached to the sun or too cold when it moved far away. So if and again the radius of Earth's orbit were changed by plus minus 5%, the animal life would not be possible. Yes, sir? Okay, it's the time over. Okay, so you can see there are number of facts have been derived, or you can see observations have been found from these experiments done by many astrophysicists and other, let's say, astrobiologists or whatever, that our universe has lot of precise fundamental values that will allow the life to evolve or sustain in our Earth. And if the values will be slightly different from the value it has, it will the life would be completely impossible. So these are the few more you can say the changes or by which we can see that what would be the effect if we change the values. Okay, like number of stars in the planetary system should be 1, parent star age, parent star mass. Let me come to thing. Let's see rotation speed. Okay, rotation speed, if it would be longer than it has, then this diurnal temperature differences would be very great, and it would be shorter, even though the atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. Now, as I was talking about the magnetic field, if it will be so stronger than it has, then electromagnetic storms would be too severe. Too few cosmic rays photons would reach planet's troposphere, which would inhibit adequate cloud formation, and if weaker, the ozone shield would be inadequately protected from hard stellar and solar radiation. The time between the magnetic reversal would be too brief, which actually this time magnetic reversal is that it's a shift of magnetic field from North Pole to the South Pole in some due course of time. And so and this all these resources I have taken for this fine tuning of solar system is why the universe is the way it is by Hugh Ross. So what I would like to conclude is that the unique values of physical quantities and improbability of change change of its value indicate that these have fine tuned so finely that any change would make the life inconceivable and give indications of an intelligent creator or a designer. From these results of many observations, calculation experiments, one can conclude that only a very tiny fraction of stars would have just the right conditions for intelligent life, as we know it to exist on a planet orbiting them. So in our universe, primitive life is likely, but intelligent life is far more rare if we consider the different conditions on the other stars and the planets orbiting around them. So even the God says that, "Oh Arjun, I am the governing seed of all existence, so there is no being moving or non-moving that can exist without me." So there definitely there is a cause which is causing these things to function properly and for the life. Thank you very much.
Now, curiosities and remarks.
So as you can see, these are facts which have been taken from the many observations and calculations. So these things can be more explored and considering the specific areas, and if someone is interested in astrophysics or cosmology, they can go for doing some simulations and they can get very can say beautiful results so that we can understand more these things, right? So any questions?
Hello, sir. Plus, I want to ask one question. Whether this fine tuning, this interpret the constant nature of universe, or does it interpret the change?
Okay, no, the fine tune actually refers to the precise value of the physical quantities our universe has, because it may be different for other universes, as we have come to know from the new results from the scientific research, that there may be possibility of different universes, multi-universe. So there may be the conditions may be different, and that combining together may be conditions which will create the life to evolve. But for us, the constants we have so far now, that is constant, and this is fine tuned to this precise value. And if it's vary with it varies with a slight, very small tiny fraction, then the life may become impossible.
As we have been taught that change is the nature of change is the change is evident in the nature.
Okay.
Every time and everything is changing. Then does it not is it not contradictory to that fine tuning?
No, you are referring to, I think, the change in the entropy of the universe. Is it something like that? Yeah, like you are saying, entropy of the universe is definitely, according to the research so far we have has been done. But even though it is changing, the physical constants always remains constant, right? Because that actually, the physical constants only they are governing these things. The entropy, how is the entropy is increasing, that is governed by this physical constant and the laws. And if the laws and physical constants, the values will be different, then there may be the variation in the entropy will not be as we are seeing right now. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
I'll be speaking on the Indo-Aryan migration theory, myth or fact, via genetic approach. India is a country of diversity, and we see diversity in the human population that we see here. There are people of the Australo-Asiatic origin here. This is the North Indian Indo-European populace, the Dravidian populace, and the East Asian populace. So what we and finally the Andamanese. So we find 5 different races living in India, and it has been a perennial question regarding how did this occur. Like if you see Europe is having a single the Caucasian species, Caucasian race, Africa the African race, China, Japan, Korea the East Asian race. But how is it that India is having so many races? And this was the question that led to the beginnings of the Indo-Aryan invasion theory. And the invasion theory has slowly evolved into a migration theory. In the beginning, it was a superior Aryan race that had invaded the inhabitants of the subcontinent and had imposed their culture on them. When we found the civilizations of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the theory modified into a barbarian race invading a highly advanced civilization and imposing their rules on them. Then later, as you will see further here, as genetic studies show there was no major invasion, it further modified into the migration theory, which says a few elite people entered the subcontinent. They took over the entire system. Something like Chanakya came and guided Chandragupta Maurya to found the Mauryan Empire. So, yeah, as you can see, the facial features are all different for all 5 races. So, my work will be, the presentation here will be primarily about, not about the political or the economic impacts of or the socio-economic impacts of the Aryan invasion theory, but rather the medical aspects of it. So, the work done by Reich et al. In 2009 was published in Nature, and it was the first conclusive proof that the Aryan invasion theory never occurred. There was no invasion, there was no gene flow from outside the subcontinent to inside the subcontinent within the last 50,000 years. The work was so impactful that when Nature published this article, it published a second article by Arvind Chakravarty just stating the importance of this paper. You can go and visit Nature website to find it. So what Chakravarty 2009 says is that the existing Aryan migration theory is you had the Austroasiatic people who settled in India between 58,000 BC to 3000 BC, and they spread all over the subcontinent. Then around 3500 BC, 3000 BC, the Dravidian people came in and they intermingled with the Austroasiatic people, and everything was fine. Then came the invaders, the Aryans, who just usurped the land, the Indo-Gangetic plain, the North India, and pushed the Dravidians south, and Austroasiatic people are almost zero. Simultaneously, along with this, somehow people came from Tibet, China into India. Then these either Dravidians or Austroasiatic migrated to Andaman, and they became the Andamanese later on over the thousands of years of evolution. So, and this is what you get the final. This is what you represented here as in Reich et al. So this is the modern theory with the existing data. So the Aryan invasion theory has great popularity simply because things seem to fit the bill. Like you see different languages, more than 1,500 languages in the country. The ancient texts talk of kings subduing foreign kings. Then you have paleogeography, which shows the different eras, and then archaeology. But then why was the genetic approach done in the first place? Simply because archaeological evidence may or may not be conclusive. In very few circumstances does archaeology give a complete picture of the scenario. For example, the Hun migration in Europe does not have any archaeological evidence left. But from historical records, we do know that this has occurred. That is why we went into the genetics in the first place. So what did genetics have to say? The work was done since 1940s, but I will be focusing from 96 onwards. The initial genetic work showed that yes, Aryan invasion occurred, simply because the North Indian genome is very close to the European genome. When I am speaking genome, most of the time it will be mitochondrial DNA and not the nucleus DNA. Why mitochondrial DNA is selected over nuclear DNA is, the nuclear DNA can come from both from mother and father, but the mitochondrial DNA comes only from the mother. So, what they found out that most of the mitochondrial DNA in 96, they found that the most of the mitochondrial DNA is closer to European. Therefore, the North India has been invaded by Europe. The South Indian is naturally present in the country for a long period of time. Then 99, when the research was further done in mitochondrial DNA, they found that there are many similarities that extended between Dravidians, I mean the South Indian blood, North Indian and Europe. So now this became now the controversy began. How is it possible? If North India has been invaded, how are you getting similarities within genotypes of South India, North India and Europe? Then the later work came that no, it's not all North Indians, not all South Indians, it is only the upper castes. Then Zerjal came and again further contradicted it again. He said this is not possible simply because there may be some founder events. People in India evolved separately from people abroad. Then Basu at 2003 came and they said no, what was the invasion is right. There is no female invasion somehow, but yet an invasion has occurred. So this was actually the beginning part which said no women entered India from abroad. So it's very strange. How can an invasion occur without women coming in from outside? Because the mitochondrial DNA has to come only from women. It was again it told that there was not just one invasion, there were two invasions, one from the northeast and one from the northwest. What Basu et al. Tried to say is that why we are getting the genetic diversification right now is that once the population settled in, we have marriages, inter-caste marriages, inter-society marriages, marriages occur within the same language. So this creates a sort of endogamy. So this is why the gene flow between two communities does not occur, and Bengalis evolve slightly different from South Indians, something like that. But even recently they found that Bengalis are more close to Malayalis rather than anyone around them. So this created more controversy further. Then Mespatalu said, 2004 again said, no, mitochondrial DNA, we have studied it more extensively, there is no gene flow in the country. So now what is happening right now? We are seeing one half of the researchers saying yes, invasion has occurred. You are seeing one half of the researchers saying no, invasion has not occurred. And this is because there are limitations to every study. A particular study will study a particular gene and no more than that. Then Sharma et al. Again came and told that no women are further entered. All women can be traced back to common genome. Sahu et al. Told some Indian specific. This is the first time people told in mainstream literature that no, maybe people went from India to abroad. People didn't come from outside to inside. Tangaraj 2006 told that no, there was only once 50,000 years ago, then no more. Then these guys will go further and write the Reich et al. Paper which finally concluded it. Chaubey 2008 was very important. He told these people, this explained why there are 1,500 languages. They said there need not be people coming from outside to inside to create a new language. But this is the major basis of the Aryan invasion theory. When Mallory first proposed the theory, he said that there is no evidence of foreign words in Indian literature, but there are references of Indian words in foreign literature. This means people from outside to inside came in and they brought their language inside. But Chaubey et al. Was the first publication in 2008 which said no, this may not occur. A language can be produced when people from outside to inside come in, or when the same set of people within the same community can create a new language. Then now comes the medical impact. From seeing the literature from 96 to 98, the Indian Genome Variation Consortium, they said they tried to analyze how to study the genes, the regressive diseases, identification of genes. They said because we have people of different descents, different invasions, different races have come in, it is extremely difficult for this country to create gene-based medicines, because for each group of people you have to study a separate, you have to create a separate study, separate database, everything will be different. So it will be extremely difficult to study the gene traits of complex and heterogeneous populations, and hence the utility in medical field may be less. Then Reich et al. Came. This publication which I mentioned was published in Nature. The impact was that within 2-3 months all Indian major newspaper publications said Indian Aryan invasion theory has been disproved. They studied extensively mitochondrial DNA from all the population from all over the country, and they figured out that the main problem began with the founding of it. For example, what does founding mean? Whenever a group of population, a small number of species, individuals of a species inhabit a particular environment, they will grow and multiply. So the initial gene pool is extremely low. So diseases that exist in that gene pool will spread. What happens in most of the world is that a single set of population has given birth to the entire population of the Europe, of the area. For example, if there are around 10 or 12 founding members in Europe, these 10 or 12 founding members in Europe only have spread the entire European population that we see today. Similar for Africa, similar for US, Australia, China. But in India there are more than one founders, and therefore you have an ancestral North Indian gene and there is an ancestral South Indian gene, which simultaneously started in India and they spread over. This they proved by measuring a term known as a fixation index. The fixation index is a probability which says how much two people diversify with each other. For example, North Indian and South Indian. If the fixation index for the two individuals is 1, that means they evolved separately. If the fixation index is close to 0, that means it's not. When these guys measured the fixation index for Europe, it was 0.033. When they measured the fixation index for the entire India, it was 0.069. Just twice, but not 1. So this was the conclusive proof. Then they came the next question, why 0.069? Why not 0.01? By the way, they haven't studied Tibeto-Burmese population and on the Andamanese population, because they were just slightly more as 0.059 and 0.069. 0.059 and 0.069 individually they varied with the rest of the country, whereas the average for the entire country is 0.069. So when they further studied, they found this ancestral North Indian gene is more common in India and Europe, while the ancestral South Indian gene is more present in South India. Does not mean North Indian population does not have it. It has it in much lesser quantities. So we had two founder populations which then spread all over the country. So it's something like this. There was an initial founder population, then you had two separate genes, and then Northeast and Anjay. So now that the Aryan invasion theory has been disproved, so what does it mean? As I said, the topic of Mallory was the prime basis for the Aryan invasion theory, which said just because some words are not found in the literature, that means people didn't come from outside to India. That means people came from outside to India, but not from India to outside. So now that this has been disproved and the similarities between Indians and Europeans is apparent, that means something has occurred. If outside to India is not possible, the only other option left is inside to outside. So is there any proof in Indian literature for that part? So we see in Bhagavatam, there is a term known as Yavan, about a set of people who are of Grecian origin. And as said by Mahabharata Adi Parva, the sons of King Yayati went and settled in the area that is known as current Greece today. So why should we believe that this Yavan is actually Greek as said in literature? So before the Aryan invasion theory, there was a theory which said Hinduism is just a perversion of Christianity, where the Hindu Brahmins, they came, they studied Christianity and they just modified it to suit their ends. This was disproved in with the discovery of the Heliodorus pillar, which is a Garuda Stambha erected for Lord Vishnu, present 5 kilometers from Sanchi, and carbon dating showed it was 150 BC. So how can something that is dedicated to Vishnu be erected before Christ if Hinduism is a perversion of Christianity? So that established that Hinduism is even older than Christianity, and in the Garudastam, the letter Yona Datena is given, which is very close in pronunciation to Yamana. And this Heliodorus was present in the court of the Grecian ambassador of Alexander, and he had taken to Vaishnava Dharma. So, so now this is being further researched into, and thank you.
Yeah, to talk on unpredictable fundamental particles and its systematic gathering in creating predictable matter.
My name is Tulsi Raman. Yes. This is yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So good afternoon to everyone. So today I will be talking about unpredictable fundamental particle and its systematic gathering in creating a predictable matter. So my deep gratitude to spiritualist and the scientist Dr. T.D. Singh and visionary of this conference. So when I started thinking, I have a long collaboration in last 1.5 years. I was collaborating with the Bhaktivedanta Institute. I came to know about him. Is a great scientist as well as a spiritualist. So it made me think about like what is the relation between this personality, like he's the inspiration to me, like what is the relation between science and spirituality. And so I'm from IISc. I do my research on plasma surface science and engineering. I felt most of the time my research is very easy. My background is physics, and it's funny, and basic physics makes you think about our existence. So if you properly understand the physics, if you get into the physics subject, particularly like any basic physics, like particularly particle physics, it always knocks your mind that so why we are here, how we made up of. This is the one of the objective which drives us to think in a different ways. So today I will be talking most of the talk towards the particle physics and what are the questions we have in the particle physics. And so so fundamental particle or elementary particle, we use the vice versa. So the elementary particles are subatomic particles, so namely the proton and neutron and so on. So what atom, right, like atom is initially the atom definition itself undivisible, means we cannot divide the particle into further we cannot divide. That is a definition of an atom. This is from a Greek word, and it's no more true after a few years. Once the Rutherford started doing experiments on the gold foil, he found that apart from the within the atom there are some more particles which is the reason for his positive results in his experiments. And the concept of subatomic particle started in the quantum era. And so if you take this particle physics research area, it's a very vast, and still it is exciting because it won many Nobel prizes, and till date this is the one of the high, I mean, it has a lot of record over winning a lot of Nobel Prizes, because here why it is more prized and more awarded is it has a lot of unhidden secrets. So to resolve that, if you resolve those secrets, we can understand our existence in a proper way. So this is the we have in our Earth we have the biggest experimental facility to investigate about these elementary particles or fundamental particles. And so if you take our atom, you know that like it has a electrons, it has a nucleus, and the nucleus is like decorated with protons and neutrons, and the external if you take, I mean, it is again surrounded with the electrons. But most of the time we visualize in a two-dimensional picture. But if you really look into a three-dimensional picture, assume that this is the nucleus, and we don't know. Even we cannot assume. I mean, we cannot what we can say visualize that. So because the atom is very tiny particle, and so how tiny you can see this. Atom dimension is 10 to the power minus 10 millimeter, and if you take a nucleus, the dimension is it will be in the order 10 to the power minus 14, and again the proton dimension is minus 15, and if you further grow, the protons again is made up of with quarks. This is again a subatomic. I mean, the further if you divide the proton or a neutron into, you could find these quarks and the electron. These dimensions are like 10 to the power minus 18. So 10 to the power minus 18 is the scales. If you think of if you intuitively think of, it's very low dimension. So even we cannot even visualize that. So that means 10 to the power minus 18 means nothing. We cannot. There is nothing. So these particles are basically unpredictable matter. So the unpredictable matter means if you want to predict a particle, we can visually its effect can be seen, but if you want to predict that, we cannot predict it. So as per the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it says that in any fundamental particle, it's tough to define at a given time. It's tough to define its momentum and its position. So this is why these particles are called as an unpredictable particle, unpredictable matter. And suppose if you take a proton and it is made up of with a quarks. So this quarks was invented by Gell-Mann, and he is again a Nobel laureate, and he said that, like, as I said, the proton is again made up of with a 2 up and one down quark. It has a positive charge, and neutron is a neutral. So see, this is the basic. This is the proton. Proton is constructed using the two up quarks and down quarks. So if you like, we are further like we are going to proton, and proton. If you divide the proton, there are quarks. So is there any, like, we can ask these questions ourselves, is there any less than that? So we can divide the quark or not. Is there anything beyond the quark? So this is the one of the fundamental questions in the physics is still that around, surrounding us. And protons and neutrons are very stable compared with other fundamental particles. So proton decays into the neutrino and electron when it comes out from the universe. So you can think of like how the for example, if it stays inside the nucleus, for example, nucleus, the proton and neutron are very stable, and there will be exchange interaction within the nucleus. But if neutron comes out from the say from the normal atmosphere, it decays into the neutrino and the electron. So this is the one of the like basic questions we have: why it is designed like, why it is designed like that. And so our conditions are very systematically, and it is no more randomness. It's a very systematic. If you look into the particle physics, it's a very systematic design. Everything is like, for example, charge of the quarks, each quark, and it is like if there is small change in the each quark charge, there will be huge disturbance in the nucleus, and the nucleus won't be stable. So here we can appreciate the way it is designed. And next, so there are a lot of subatomic particles. So if you can classify the subatomic particle, and there are a lot of subatomic particles. So even, for example, Fermi said that I could remember the names of all these subatomic, I could have become a botanist. So because we have a lot of subatomic particles around us. And so systematic gathering, for example, as we know, the fundamental particles are the building block of the atom. So this unpredictable matter gathers into almost all, it forms almost all 92 variety of atoms in our periodic table. The rest of the elements what we find in the periodic table, so most of them are artificially produced atoms. Let us take an example, the carbon. So carbon is a main atom which constructs our our biomolecules, the entire microbial system and the human body. So it has a four electrons, and it creates very nice bonding with most of the the elements, and it forms wide variety of molecules. But so the same atom, there is one more atom, silicon, which sits in the same periodic table, and it has even the 4 valency electrons in the valence electrons. But why the carbon only is chosen to construct our human body or microbial system, the biochemistry. So the reason is, like, suppose if you create a carbon using, if you try to mimic the biomolecules using a silicon structure, it's a very highly unstable system. So if you try to make a as I said, it has a 4 valency electrons in a silicon, and you try to put it in the DNA or RNA, because the valence is similar, but if you try to make a biomolecule out of silicon, how it looks, it's very unstable. So these things like makes us to think in a different way. So as I said, the carbon atom is used to building the protein, amino acids and polymers, so even the biomolecules. So the silicon again we used to this is it creates very it creates a life form, and it creates the silicon which is used to create the computers and so on. So we have about 60 elements in our body, and about 29 are very active elements which is useful to function our body properly. So we can say that our body is really marvelous design. So so as I said, so these are the predictable matter, the unpredictable particles. So unpredictable, let us take what is the relation between a predictable matter and unpredictable matter, predictable matter and unpredictable matter. So this is the paper which is appears in a Science magazine. So when the Big Bang started, initially the entire universe is only with the fundamental particles, and it slowly and started building up this kind of a universe, and the organisms, the living entities. So in this concept, like, we can ask many questions. So the basic feature of the universe have been determined 13.7 billion. This is the age of the universe as per the modern science, and it still is expanding as per their theory. It composed of 4% of atoms, and the exotic matter, it includes 20% of the exotic dark matter, it includes black holes and so on. And the dark energy is around 76%. So if you can ask the following questions in this based on the above argument, based on above arguments. The above is only observable universe. We don't have now. This is the with our existing top end the telescopes, this is the predicted universe. We have still, like, we cannot, this is the resolution of the, this is the limitation of the telescopes. So observable universe itself, we could find lot of like 4% of the atoms, and the exotic dark matter like 20%, and the rest is dark energy. And why the dark energy is very constant and it is not varying. So this is the one of the biggest question in the physics, like what is the how the black energy is helpful in creating universe, and how it is manifested, and so on. So this is one of the biggest question, and why visible matter is always constant. For example, if you take atoms, or the earth and earth crust and other asteroids and so on, and the total mass of this matter is total mass is always constant. So as per the for example, Big Bang theory, their theory is like the fundamental particles are most of the time it is going to constructing the predictable matter. Then whether what is the enhancement in the mass enhancement in the universe over a period of time. So these are the basic questions we have in our minds. And so one more question, like in basic physics, so we have two types of charges. What is an electron, and we have a positive and negative. So how it manifests, and what is the reason behind? Is there any reason? These are the very fundamental questions in the physics. So we need to address these questions with even the topmost scientists. They try to find out what is the reason why the charges have the different kind of polarities, and how it is helpful in creating a very beautiful system. And these are some of the basic questions, like why like charges it repel, like what is the mechanism behind the repelling of an like charges, and the again so vice versa, and how the different charges get attracted. Does the elementary particle have any finite consciousness? This is the questions raised by some of the scientists, that it will have any finite consciousness. Even even a planet, the plant is having some kind of a consciousness. So whether does the elementary particle have any consciousness? So these are some of the questions in the basic physics as well as the basic sciences. So I don't know how it could be answered with existing modern science, or with our Vedic literature. So why again there is a question, like why it is made into too many pieces. For example, if you take a proton or a neutron, why again it is divided into quarks and the neutrons, quarks, and again how the why it is made into why the fundamental particle broken into pieces. So what is the reason? So these are the another exciting topic in the physics. So see, most of the end of the day, scientists say that we need to have another view about to understand it. So this is very true actually. Probably we may have some answers to the above questions even from our Vedic literature. Even I am not much familiar with these concepts. So this is about the our matter around us, and the predictable and unpredictable matter, and which creates beautiful system around us. And so thank you for the opportunity.
Now the curiosities and remarks, if any. Mr. Babu Ranjan Thakur from IIT Kharagpur to talk on Viman Shastra from a modern aircraft dynamics perspective.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to talk on Vaimanic Shastra from the modern perspective. Before going to reign of the Vaimanic Shastra, I would like to clear something which is very prevalent in people's mind, which is because this is coming from the scriptures of India, and many people thought that scriptures is nothing but myth. And sometimes earlier there was one conference on All India Science Conference. There also one paper regarding Vimansas has been presented. There was a lot of controversy regarding this thing. People say that they are actually fascinating people, and they are what today is called Hindutvaization of what science. So it is not like that. After going through the extensive study of this Viman Shastra, I would like to mention that some whole structure may not be applicable in today's regarding today's science, but it is those ideas which drive the technology. We can't create the technology from this prescribed mantras or prescribed shloka, but we can get the idea what function can be computed from the technology. And my main motive is those getting to those ideas, not getting any technology from those slokas. So one motive is we are not going to discredit that modern science, but we are acknowledging our ancient science also. This is the point. So here this Maharshi Bhardwaj is the author of Vaimanic Shastra, and he compiled this book with even earlier sages who he compiled this Vaimanic Shastra from consulting the earlier sages. Therefore, there is a different part in Vaimanic Shastra who deals with different sages, ancient sages. So, and in modern day, there is J.R. Jayasher. He was the international Sanskrit Research Organization chief, and he published the book called Vaimanic Shastra and Astronautics of Maharshi Bhardwaj. Now I want to go very ancient India, and that is very ancient, that is Treta Yuga, Dwapar and Kali Yuga is right now. So in Satyuga there was no need to have any airplane, and in Treta Yuga there was mantra was prevalent in those days, and because of this there was used to be mantrika Shakti, and by which plane used to driven, and that means mantra is used to power the plane, and that's why those plane is called mantrika plane, mantrika. And in Dwapar Yuga there was tantrika Shakti, means you should have a tantrika means some instrument which powered by mantra, something like a stick, or this you can empower those stick with mantra. And in Kali Yuga that is Kartika Shakti, artificial power, and that is yantra also it is called. Excuse me. Okay. Here I am mentioning some shloka from the Maharshi Bhardwaj book. And why am I mentioning this? Because in whether it is science or it is scriptures or spirituality, both things derive from the your reference or inference. Inferential method works in science also and in scriptures in spirituality also. In whenever we write a paper in journal or any publication, we go through the reference where we have taken, and we do something and we give some inference from this and put something else, some whichever we got the inference from that our work. So in this same way, I am putting some shloka from the Maharshi Bhardwaj book, which is quite true in from modern aircraft perspective also, which is Mantrika Vimanaj or Pushpaka and other. These are the mantras. First mantra, Panch Vimansan Mantrika Pushpakadi Pravedina, Sutra 2. This is a Mantrika Vimanajar of Pushpaka and other 25 varieties, and in this all 25 varieties are also mentioned. And second, Bhairavadi Vidati Tantrika Shashat Panchasat, this is the Sutra 3. Tantrika Vimanajar of Bhairav and other 56 varieties. This is for Dwapar Yuga. And Shakunadi Panch Vimasat Kirtaka, Shakuna and other 25 types of Vimanajar Kritika. This is for Kali Yuga. Mr. Robert Pinotti's view. He is the one of the Italian thinker and one ufologist also. He one of the world science conference where he pointed out that he said that certain description of the Vimana seemed too detailed and technical in nature to be labeled as myth. He is talking about the Viman Shastra, and he also cited some various texts to show there were 32 secrets relating to the operation of Vimanas, some of which could be compared to modern day use of radar, solar energy and photography. Again, here I want to mention that radar, solar energy and photography, why we are saying this? These are technology we might not able to translate those things in this word, but function we are inferencing from the functional point of view. Those function which mentioned in scriptures resembles these function. That is why we are saying that radar, solar energy and photography were also they are present in ancient Vimanas. These are the location of yantras and type. These are in location of yantra and 32 type of yantra mentioned here. In this, all thing whether that kind of radar or photography, even a still technology which is very recent technology. And again, as here I went through the still technology and in their Viman Shastra perspective. In Viman Shastra, actually still technology is what they avoid to detect the others enemy aircraft. They try to avoid to detect from other enemy aircraft. In same function is the Viman Shastra also. There is same function which try to vanish from the vision. That's why we say that there was a still technology, because there was mentioned 3 main material which used to make the aeroplane, and from basic 3 main material there 16 more material has to be compiled, but we have not able to translate that 16 material right till now. So we don't have any idea about what those are and which proportion they make the 16th material, 16th other material. So these are the things. These are the and some ancient aircraft. These are the Vimanas which are mentioned for the Kartika, means for the Kali Yuga. These Rukma Vimana, these are the top view. These are the one shloka is there. This is the one shloka from Bharadwaj Muni works regarding this Rukma Vimana. And after going through these all structure, these are Shakuna Vimana, Tripura Vimana, Shakuna Vimana. After going through all these picture, all these structure, being an aerospace engineer, I am quite satisfied and quite convinced that it is quite really impossible to fly this kind of aeroplane aerodynamically, but because it is mentioned in scriptures, maybe we are not in that position that we could empower this aeroplane in that way which can be empowered and on those days. So I think we are getting we have a purpose, we have a idea, and we have to empower ourselves, we have to encourage ourselves regarding these facts, regarding these ideas, to to increase our effort in innovation. And these are the power generators. One shloka is also was regarding solar power, but I don't know how was it, how technology was used at that day, but there was also mentioned solar power also. And last thing, I would like to end my talk by this famous quotes from Aldous Huxley: facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. Thank you.
Now over to the audience for curiosities or remarks, if any.
Yeah. Yeah, in Mimamsa Shastra it is given. This picture from, I told you, that picture from J.R. Jaisyar. He translated the Mimamsa Shastra Sanskrit from English, and on that book it is given. He translated it in English. Yeah, yeah. From the shloka. In a shloka, size, height, width, all things is given. All things are given. No, in a shloka properly, not, it is not designed. He designed from the shloka. Yeah, yeah. No, I don't think it is. It were used by general purpose because. Yeah, yeah. That's why. Yeah, it was used by highly privileged people only. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 That's why in Treta Yuga there was mantra which can empower the airplane to fly, but today we don't have efficacy of that kind of mantra. So we have propulsion, other thing. Then those days, because here at that point of view, there is, I think, in when mantra is plane is empowered by mantra, then we don't have any others idea or any others or logic is there. What can we do? Yeah, yeah, gross level. Because Yeah, yeah.
Sir,
There
I
is also three kind of aeroplane is mentioned in this book also. That one plane which place to place, which moves to which moves to country, another plane with different planets. And in right now in recent also we have three kind of the same category.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, okay.
According to a study done by the scientists of the ISC Bengal in 1975,
Yeah.
they found that no flight can be built on the principle based on the Viman Shastra. There is no emphasis on the aerodynamics and the aeronautical, as well as the geometry mentioned in the Viman Shastra is the horrible and horrendous. So, isn't it safe to say that Vimana Shastra is a product of the creative imagination rather a scientific test, as you have said? What are your views on this?
I already mentioned that from dynamic perspective, aerodynamics point of view, it is really impossible to fly. Those design, it is impossible to fly. But it is mentioned in scriptures. And one thing you are saying, it is not a scriptures. It has been written by some other people and given the scriptures name, right?
So, is it a product of creative imagination like science fiction? Because they too inspire for the
See,
ideas.
yeah, actually what is science fiction? If we have not created it in reality, that is science fiction. If we would be able to live that life, if we would be able to create, that would not be any more fiction. So, we are not in that position that we are not getting that idea, we are not able to create that technology. That is why we are calling it, we can call it and those things. So, if we will be able to do, that would be reality. That would be reality.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Session is over.
Thank you, Dr. Tripathi. Now I request Dr. Tripathi to present the mementos to all the speakers. Mr. Palash Devangan. Mr. Ganesh Subramaniam. Dr. Tulsi Raman. Mr. Babu Ranjan Thakur. Now I request Dr. K.K. Singh to please present the memento to Dr. K.P. Tripathi. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, speakers. Okay, there is no refreshment right now. We'll be continuing with our next session. And there's an announcement. The certificates as well as the hard copies of the proceedings, you can collect it from the registration desk after this session. We have a workshop on personality development now.